I'm so excited to be here to talk today about finding peace after the end of a toxic relationship. I just got back from Mexico where I'd spent the majority of that relationship. And I had a lot of feelings there. I had a lot of reactions. Now, this wasn't my first time back, but I was staying in the condominium that he and I had built and where we spent probably 8 months of a relationship. So probably for the first time I'd been back was a year ago, interestingly enough, and I had gone with my sister. So there was another trigger. I'd gone with my sister, who had then passed away in June. I didn't know she was so sick, but so I was more mindful of that being a year apart. I was more aware of just my feelings about remembering the time with her, how I was feeling physically, how she was feeling physically, because I had been recovering from a total hip replacement surgery. So, but when we get into these arenas, when we come back and we think about surviving these relationships, making peace with it. In fact, I'm so sorry. I had planned to go live with Tori from Onyx Aero Consulting, but that ended up being a disaster, a technical disaster. So I will reschedule it with her. It was amazing, but we had all sorts of echoing problems going on over on Instagram and TikTok, and then it never streamed here with YouTube. So I will figure all that out, and I will have her back, and we will do this. But hey, Kara, I'm so glad to see you. And I'm now trying to go live directly through YouTube, which means that I don't have all this separation between you and me, so that there's no texting lag. I can actually see you talking to me. So thank you so much, Kara. I'm glad that you're here with me. And hey, Samantha, so good for you to join us too. So what I want to do is I want to talk about finding closure after a toxic relationship. Talking to Tori about legal battles, we end up thinking when we decide to end the marriage, when we decide to get a divorce or to separate or break up, whatever it is, whatever kind of partnership you've had, you think that that breakup is the final piece. You think that it's over, and then the abuse continues, but it just continues in a new form. And what's awful is that you're no longer the naive person that you were when you got into the relationship. Now you're trying to manage all the risks and dangers and vulnerabilities that you're aware of. I remember with mine, we didn't have any assets together in the United States, and we didn't have a bank account in the United States, but that didn't mean he couldn't claim that. I mean, I suddenly realized that the same love bombing, the charismatic kind of overtures, the way that they create falsehoods, could continue with others that make me look bad. And I remember feeling that same level of terror that I felt as I was trying to exit the relationship again. And I somehow thought that the hard part should have been over, but it wasn't over. And now I'm like trying to deal with all my pain, all my anger, all my sense of betrayal, and at the same time contain the risk that it poses to me. So I will definitely have Tori back and we'll talk about that. But as I was processing that conversation I had with her on TikTok and Instagram, it made me realize I was thinking about of all the ways that we have to make peace as we try to get the closure and wrap it up and find resolution. There's so much work that has to be done. The sense of the shock that we thought we knew we were getting into a relationship with and found out that we're wrong, the sense of betrayal we feel with ourselves. We also have all the shock of what happened, the actual ramifications. Maybe it's financial ramifications, maybe it's had health consequences, maybe it's affected relationships like family relationships or friendships. Maybe it's affected your job. Maybe you've made changes, like you now are unemployed or you've taken a new job. For me, I moved. I moved from several times in that relationship. I moved from my original home state to another state and then moved again internationally. And at the end of the relationship, I moved again internationally. So there was all this multiple pieces and loss of connection, loss of network and community that I had had. So there's so many components that go into this sort of trying to find closure and trying to find resolution. So I would love to know, how are you doing today with that? What do you think is the piece that causes you the greatest conflict and pain? Where do you find yourself? What are you reviewing in your mind? And what kind of like bothers you or wakes you up in the night? Maybe it's what's the consequences that you're trying to now live out in your life, that you're trying to make peace with it. One of the things that's for me, this is going on right now for me, is that I've been considering getting into a new relationship and in meeting people, and I'm realizing how I'm struggling with what to trust, what kind of boundaries I want to have or not. Not only just we talk about what to share or not share, but it's more than that. It's kind of um, what kind of boundaries do I want to have, and you know is it safe to share what I want to share? And then here's the questions of when you start to get a little more serious with someone new, then you end up thinking, what kind of relationships do I want to have them have with my family, with what do we blend, where how do we blend what we blend? We get all these kinds of questions. So I'm going to pause. I realized I had it on top chats and I just moved it to live chat, so now, Kara, I can see your comments. You said you had to move from state to state to get away from him, and that you have adult children. Yeah, it gets tricky when there's these international and or just even national moves. It gets really, really tricky. It can become difficult as we try to manage and navigate how we're going to do that. So here's one of my vulnerabilities. I'm one of these people, and I would love to know if it's true for you. I'm one of these people that I really like to I'm just trusting, I like the sense of being part of the same team with somebody, that we're all in on this together. And so that now I'm realizing that really set me up. So when I readily added him to my, don't cringe, guys, don't crunch, because just because I'm a psychologist doesn't mean I have it together, and doesn't mean I don't make mistakes, and that doesn't mean I'm not human, because I'm human. But when we first got into remember, I was in a long-term relationship. I'm trying to defend myself. I was in this long-term relationship for 33 years with somebody, met at 19. That's when I met Brad. I met Brad at 19. We created this life together. We built our careers together. He put me through school. Brad supported me and put me through school. We had a joint account. And then I get into this new relationship, and I'm no longer 19. I already have a career. I've already established myself. I have what I have. And yeah, I kind of want to go back to what I had, even though we're not starting at the same point. And so I did joint checking, even though it was my money. Yeah, I know, stupid. And then when he proposed a cash system to pay for the bills, I thought, why not? It never crossed my mind that this cash system was so that he could siphon money off. I can't technically call it embezzlement because it wasn't a business, but it was it was he wasn't putting anything in. So but you trust that, and you don't realize that there's a level of gullibility or naivete. And so now when now that I'm the age that I am, I'm thinking about, and I had the experiences that I had, I'm rethinking all of this. What do I want to do, and what's wise to do, and what's not wise to do. Yeah, so MS, I'm so glad you're here, MS. You're saying that your problem is that you share too much, way too much, and then they end up giving them information that they manipulate. And you're making a good point. So Sandra L. Brown, if you guys are not familiar with her work, I highly recommend that you check out Sandra L. Brown. She has with Institute for Relational Harm. She's written several books. One's for a clinician, but the two she's written for lay people. One is called How to Spot a Dangerous Man, and the second book is called Women Who Love Psychopaths. I'll be honest, I don't like that title. It makes me, oh, Sandra was your therapist. Oh, wonderful. That title, makes me feel like it's kind of cringy. But if you read the rest of the title, it says, and other toxic types like narcissists. But yeah, and the reason she's gender specific, and I've asked her, I actually got to interview her in, it was just recently, it was in November. And she said the reason it was gender specific was because that was what her research was based on. She had 600 couples in a pathological love relationship. And I think the majority of them were women who were married to a psychopathic or toxic man. So therefore, she was being kind of true to the research. She didn't want to generalize because she didn't think she could legitimately generalize and say that. So I get why she wrote about women, But what I don't like about it is the implication that it's women who are vulnerable to this. And we all know that's not true. We all know plenty of men who've gotten into toxic relationships and have been taken for a horrible ride and have been very vulnerable, very, abused and betrayed by women as well. So, and it also for me kind of feels like the trope of, oh, the needy, dependent woman who ends up, gets her heart broken. And it happens to everybody. It doesn't happen just to women. But one of the points she makes, back to what you're saying, MS, is that she said that there's a type of person, and she'd found this with her research, and I'm sure it's both true for both men and women. I would love any guy who's watching this, I'd love to have you weigh in and let me know. But there's a certain type of a personality that tends to be more agreeable, open-minded, tends to be more cooperative, really kind of sees the world collaboratively like a team. And as a result, they tend to then behave trustingly because they believe the world is basically a good place. And by the way, this is not the same thing as codependent or people pleasing. That's actually something different. This is a hardwired part of a person's personality. It's that's why it's measured as part of your personality type. It's part of the big 5 factors that make up you and I. And one of them is called agreeable, and it's the way we approach the world. It's actually kind of a positive quality. It's a warm invitational quality, not a weak, insecure. It's not based out of insecurity. It's just based about, just like there's people who see the world as sort of half full and good, and then there's those that tend to sort of see the dark side and the downside of stuff. It's kind of hardwired in. This, like that, is kind of hardwired in. You kind of tend to be open-hearted, kind of wear your feelings on your sleeve a little more. You tend to assume the best about people. And it's just kind of the way you see things. So she found that group then accidentally does a kind of trust called blind trust. Not earned trust, they blindly trust. And she urged people to reconsider that instead of just going into a situation and saying, I think the world's good, therefore I'm going to treat it good. She's urging us to reconsider that and to go into it from the standpoint of, people need to show me that they're good. And then once they show me, then they've earned the right of me, being more open with them, more, let them into my world. But here's the part that's hard. So let's go back to the personalities that are antagonistic, because that tends to be the toxic, narcissistic, or psychopathic group. They tend to be antagonistic. That group, however, tends to be the flip. Back to that, the opposite of agreeable is antagonistic. They literally are the inverse. So the inverse of openness, believe good things about others, tend to be more open about your sharing, about who you are. They're the reverse of that. That means they tend not to trust other people. They tend to be suspicious. They're more guarded. They tend to anticipate ulterior motives. They tend to approach things not from a collaborative team viewpoint. They tend to approach it from more of a lone wolf kind of perspective. Well, so what happens in that? Think about that. Think about the way that agreeable person interacting with an antagonistic person. Think about how that's going to work out. So agreeable person, an antagonistic person says, let's use my example. I would really like to be on your joint accounts. And, since you have the card in your name, doesn't it make more sense for us to take it out in cash and pay in cash? By the way, we're living in a country that dealt with cash. It made sense. See, it wasn't like he said something. If he said that in the United States, especially in COVID, when nobody wanted cash, I would have thought, ding, 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 that doesn't make sense. No, we were living in a country that was a cash system. Sure, okay, I can see that because I'm open, agreeable. I never considered the fact that this may be somebody who's antagonistic, more paranoid, more suspicious, and that this was a way in which for him to take advantage of me. Never crossed my mind. Yeah, isn't that wild? And so what they do is they play against. This is, in fact, there was just somebody who posted a kind of like a confrontation to one of my recent videos. I think it was on TikTok, where I said that I just talked about not reacting to triggers. I don't think it's made it to YouTube yet. I just said I was in the condo where I'd spent a lot of my marriage, and I was not reacting to triggers. And a person wrote in and said, we've never gotten to hear his side of the relationship, and there's always two sides. I'm thinking, okay, well, that doesn't feel really good. I don't know why you're here on this side of TikTok. And why you need to weigh in. And beside, who made you judge of my relationship? I don't actually know why you need to hear his side to see who's telling the truth. That to me feels really, really odd. But there is an assumption that I thought was a valid assumption that I did want to address, is that when we're in these not narcissistic abusive relationship, we act as if everything that's happening is above board. We act as if that there is an action and then a reaction going on. So if person is being deceptive, it's because they have an intrusive partner who's not safe, right? See, that's how it would work. I have to hide and sneak around because you're too intense, you're difficult, you're making my life hell, so then I'm just going to be more cautious. I'm going to tell you less because I have to. That's a response to you. But that's not how it works in narcissistically abusive relationship. We aren't in a relationship where there's this give and take. We've actually met a false persona from the get-go. I didn't know this guy I found out a year into the relationship, he was dating a minimum of 7 other women. I found the text message threads of those conversations, intimate relationships with women. I didn't know that. He presented it was exclusive. I found out 1 month before, actually a few days before we were getting married, he was married still. He never told me that. He told me he was divorced. So is it to take two to tango when you have someone withholding key pieces of information that you're building a foundation on? That's not reciprocity, and it's certainly not a react and action and a reaction sort of situation. That's outright deception, misleading, manipulation, exploitation to keep the other person at an advantage, a disadvantage, in order for the first person to exploit the situation. It's not at all taking two people failing to dance well. This is a outright exploitation and a predatory behavior, predatory relationship. That's what narcissistic abuse is. Now, I know my situation probably is a little more on the extreme, but a lot of us have been into a relationship with somebody who did not fully disclose things that had huge ramifications for us, like what their expectations were. Maybe they didn't disclose what their STI and their mental health and physical health condition was. Maybe they outright lied about something I heard a situation where I know of this case, I know of this case, where the partner believed the first person was dying of brain cancer and the whole thing had been a lie. They'd even been taking this person to the hospital, dropping them off for their appointments that never existed. A lot of us have gotten into these relationships where there's like massive withholding and deception and double lives and all sorts of stuff that are going on. So it comes back to this predatory, this antagonistic connection that's happening, to where we go in and we assume good things because we're told that we think we know who we've met and we don't know them at all. Yeah, I'm reading your comments, guys. I literally felt like he set hurdles and I had to prove that I could jump over them, and that was exhausting. Exactly. So for me, let's go back to that situation with the cash. He's saying we live in a culture now that's primarily cash. It's not easy to go to the bank. Wouldn't it make sense to draw a large sum of money that we would live on for the month? Okay, yeah, I used to work for a group home that did that. That makes sense. When you have trustworthy people in charge of the administration of the finances, sure, I don't have a problem with that. Never dreaming that this is just to exploit me. Never dreaming that. So, and think it through. I agree with you. Think it through. If I had said, no, I don't really like that, then I would have been challenged. What is your problem? You already know what it's like living here. Why are you making it so difficult? Do you have to control the money? What's going on? See, you can already hear the argument that's going to get spun out, making you then the difficult one for feeling cautious and edgy and really not wanting to go along with it. That's a typical thing that happens in these relationships is they put you in compromising positions. And then when you feel at a gut level something's off. And then when you don't follow through on it because of your gut, then you're challenged about why you're difficult. I know we kind of like got off the topic about making closure, but some of these things are, this is how it ties into making closure. When you come out of this, you then have to decide what you're going to do going forward in order to protect yourself and how to hold on to your own boundaries. What boundaries do you want to have? How are you going to manage them? How are you going to keep yourself safe? How can you be okay knowing that you're going to displease people? And what does this all look like? So that's a part of making peace after one of these toxic relationships. And I think, yeah, you're making a very good point. But several of you on the commenters are making a very, very good point. I think one of the new commitments we all should be making as we sort of find resolution with ourselves around these relationships is that anybody who acts like these boundaries and expectations are difficult, that's somebody we don't want to have a relationship with. That they've by nature excluded themselves from being a safe person. See, we kind of go, at least I have. I'd love to know if you're the same. I think a lot of us go into these relationships thinking it's my job to get along with people. Okay, is that true for you? Do you end up going into these relationships thinking it's my job to get along with people? No, actually, it's not your job. Your job is to keep yourself safe. Your job is to maintain your healthiness. Mental healthiness, spiritual healthiness, financial healthiness, physical healthiness. Yeah, all of these are realms. That's your job. Your job is yourself. And if you do a good job, then you'll have more to give to those around you who need you, who are depending on you. Your children, your jobs, your neighbors, your friends, your partner. Your job is to keep yourself safe. So, anyone who puts you in a position where they want you to compromise your safety is essentially saying that one, they don't care about you. They care about what they get from you. And two is that they don't respect you. That's really what they're saying. They don't respect you and they're not respecting your boundaries. And they're wanting you to violate you so they can then exploit your vulnerabilities. I'm realizing I don't want people like that in my life. It's not my job to get along with the world. I really kind of grew up with that as a mindset growing up in the 1960s and 70s, especially as a woman in rural Midwest in the United States. Maybe that's not true in other settings and other cultures and other countries, but as a woman in 1960s and 70s, we were really urged to be pleasing people, very pleasing people. And I'm realizing that has not bode well for me. It's put me in a lot of dangerous positions, and that I would be better off to to be more protective of myself first. So I'd be curious for those of you, maybe you didn't grow up in that. Maybe you had sort of a different experience that you learned something different. Yeah, I like that, MS. Your job is to learn to listen to your intuition. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Loretta, I agree with you, Loretta. Part of what we struggle with, and this is another really key piece, and thank you for bringing that up, is the grief that we experience then when it's all said and done. There's two levels of it, I think. There's the grief that we feel for the way that we've been affected, maybe the way our circumstances have changed, the things that we've lost, whether they're tangibles or intangibles. But there's also the feeling of grief around the betrayal of ourselves. And part of that ties in with shame, embarrassment. There's all sorts of like feelings that swirl in that, feeling, maybe even feelings of failure about ourselves or feeling less about ourselves. So all of that is part of what we have to work on, is to make peace with it. Oh, Nocturne, I'm so glad that you're here, a 32-year-old male. I agree with you completely about growing up believing that it's important to have everybody like you. Exactly. It's interesting that also men are feeling that pressure too. It's not just of a woman thing, but it's also, maybe it's just a thing. Maybe in some cultures it's just a thing that we're to keep people happy, and the degree that we're a good person or a nice person is our willingness to be easygoing and people pleasing. That's fascinating. I appreciate that perspective a whole lot. I know we throw around the word patriarchy a lot, and I know that kind of can be a uncomfortable word for some, but I think almost maybe this is what in fact I have to write quotes like thoughts to quotes, just what I do for Instagram. And I had and my VA finds these quotes, and then I use her ideas, and then I put out some thoughts about it. One she found that was really fascinating, and I want to read what I wrote, and see what you think. This is the quote she found, because it ties right into what we're talking about. The quote was, anyone who wishes to go beyond the free will of another person is already practicing narcissistic characteristics. This is written by uh, Mamandan Day. I can't even say the name. It's a very African name, so I'm gonna ruin it. I'm sorry about that. It's beautiful. I love this saying. So this is what I wrote in response to that. Have you ever considered what it means to be human? Is it our autonomy? Is it our curiosity? Is it what makes us compassionate? What separates us from beasts? There's a scene in Dune when the young Duke's son, Paul, is being tested by Reverend Mother Bene Gesserit with a gom jobber, a poison tipped needle. Paul's own mother had taught him the secret ways of mind control. Now he must be tested to see if he can be trusted with these skills. On the Reverend Mother's order, Paul plunges his hand into a small box, only to be met with searing pain as the muscles and sinew of his hand seem to burn away. The deadly needle's sharp end hovers close to his neck, ready to strike him dead should he jerk back as he stifles a scream. Animals can't control their fear, humans can. What if we all face a similar test, not like the Reverend Mother's to manage fear, but one that manages our capacity towards one another? Can you respect your neighbor's right to disagree, to say no, to head in a different direction? Will you resist taking what belongs to them, even when it means for you're going without or going it alone? Can you create space for their differences, even when it seems nonsensical? See, every time we limit another person's ability to express their humanity, their freedoms, their needs, their desires, and their dreams, we've imprisoned them. And anytime we seek or take something they haven't eagerly given us, we've raped them. And each time we've attacked or sullied their worth, we've murdered them. So, what are you? Are you a human, or are you a narcissistic beast? And I think that's what it really boils down to, is our ability to respect each other, really respect each other, even when it feels unfair, and even when we think they've gotten advantages they didn't deserve, or they shouldn't have had, or that we should have had. And learning to honor other people compassionately, honor them. I think that's the hard work of learning to be a whole healthy human being, a whole healthy human being. And whenever we step and we cross over these boundaries where we think that it's okay, either because we think we can get away with it, or because we think it's unfair, or just because we think it's our right, whatever the reason, in that moment, we have offended, we have exploited and manipulated another human being. And in that moment, they cease to be human, and we've turned into a beast. I think that's something we across the world needs to learn to understand. And if we did, this would be such a nicer place, such a safer place for all of us. Yeah, it is. Loretta said it's death by 1,000 pinpricks. You slowly bleed it out as your spirit is crushed. I so agree. It is. And it is frustrating when people take or assume or consume when it isn't theirs at all, when it's ours. It is so, so hurtful. So let's talk about, let's dig in. Where are you all struggling to heal? So as you're trying to make peace with yourself about what happened, and I'm thinking about this across all sorts of like capacities. I'm thinking about, are you struggling to accept that it happened? Are you struggling to heal your brokenness about how it's damaged your sense of self-esteem or your sense of worth? Are you struggling to be okay with the way that you were vulnerable and hurt? Are you financially trying to recover? Are you struggling with the loss of the relationship? Maybe there's a part of you that wishes the good part of the relationship is back. You're really struggling with now feeling alone and cut off. What is it that you're struggling with today that has been making it hard for you to find peace and make some closure with what has happened? Maybe, like for me, I'll tell you what one of mine is. I'm a person that wants answers. I like the I mean, think about it. I'm a psychologist. What do psychologists do? We make sense of things. We take a bunch of behavior, maybe your behavior or someone else's behavior, and we begin to make assumptions about it. We like to draw conclusions and create a way to understand, make it make sense. So for me, one of the things I really have struggled with, I continue to struggle with, is just not understanding fully what happened. What was the lie in this relationship and what was the truth? I'll never fully ever know that. I have a feeling a lot of it was a lie, but I'll never really know what was real and what wasn't real. And so for me, part of my healing has been to say, I have a feeling a lot of it was a lie, but I'll never really know what was real and what wasn't real. And so for me, part of my healing has been to say, I want that. I should have that, but it's okay if I don't get it. Doesn't mean I can't move forward without it. So that's one of the things I've been struggling with. Oh, Nocturne, I'm glad that you're going for a walk. That's awesome. And Alejandro, so glad to see you here with us today. I appreciate you hopping on. So, Kara, you're struggling with a level of both mental and physical. I'm sorry, I got to move my microphone so I can see it. Mental, physical, and coming out of it okay. And Alejandro, you're saying you have so much regret for the poor decisions you've made about not knowing your self-worth. Ada says she's realizing there's a lot of damage that's been done to the children because of choices made. Oh yeah, that's another big one. Kathy's saying I'm struggling because he seemingly is moving on so quickly after the discard. And I don't want him to escape the situation until we sell the house. Yeah, exactly. They often do that. And then what does real and what not real matter? I'm not for sure it matters because the healthy relationship's healthy or not genuine. Yeah, I'll tell you why it mattered to me, my blue sky. And then I'll also let's talk about some of the things that you guys are all bringing up. It matters to me for this reason. So a little bit more about my history. I grew up in a home with chronic gaslighting, severe gaslighting. So I never, and even who I was in the family constantly was shifting. So I might have been a great child today because I got the A's and was pulling my weight and following the chores, doing what I was supposed to do. And then suddenly I might do something, it might be it might be small. It might not even make sense to me at least, but suddenly I was in the doghouse. Maybe I walked wrong or I spilt something. Maybe I forgot something, but suddenly I was in the doghouse, I was scapegoated, and it would flip back and forth, back and forth. And so reality to me was tricky. I never quite knew, and things were reinterpreted. The molestation experience was called molestations instead of rapes. I suffered rapes. I wasn't molested, I was raped. But it was considered as a family because it was just too toxic, too painful as a family to admit that their little girl had gotten raped. So those are the kinds of things that I struggled with, was the shifting of the truth. So when I got into this relationship and found out I'd met somebody who was literally living a second life, a double life, and that they're near the end of the marriage, I asked him, this is what I thought we do when we go through a day. You did this, I did this, you did this, I did this. I said, how much of that is true? And he said, not at all. Not at all. So to discover, I've been in a relationship with somebody who literally fed me a reality that was false, similar to what I had survived growing up, was really crazy making for me. I don't like it. It makes me feel out of control. So that's a thing for me. That's a my thing. And that's why I like that. That's why I'm saying it's going to be different for each one of us. That's what that list, every person who answered just now listed something different. Some of you are trying to struggle with who you are and how could that happen. Others, you are struggling with the ramifications to those that you love, that you've brought into your life, like your children. Some of you are trying to make peace with the regret, your grief over all of this. So it's going to be different. For me, it was, I really wanted to know what's real. So that's why it kind of is, it will have your own stamp on it. Your issues, what you need to make peace with is going to be unique to you, and it won't be exactly the same as it is for somebody else, for Samantha or Kara or Alejandro or Nocturnal. It will look different for every single person. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think even that's why I went into psychology. I think one of the things that attracted me was it made sense of a world, and I really wanted my world to make sense because it felt like it didn't make sense for a lot of years. So that's why that would particularly hit me hard, is that's my vulnerability. So I have a challenge for you. This is because this is so important for us to bring healing, is the challenge for you is I want you to think of the thing that makes you the most upset. It's the thing that you find yourself wanting to talk about over and over, or you review in your mind, or bothers you. Maybe it wakes you up at night. Maybe it's whenever you see it around you, even when it's not happening directly to you, but you see it, you just feel intensity. You feel stirred up around it. Maybe you go, red hot angry. I don't know. But you know yourself, you know the sign that it's upsetting you. So identify that thing, that situation, or the story, or the whatever it is. And then I want you to think about what is the theme of that thing. So say, for example, you see something on the television and it really works you up, and it's whatever it is. Maybe somebody's lying to somebody, or maybe it's somebody's walking away with getting away with something, or maybe somebody has something they or took some, whatever it is that you think of the scenario, and then pull out from it the theme. Is it a theme of betrayal? Is it around justice? Is it around loss? Is it around trust? Think of what the themes are, and then think about how that then applies to you and your life regarding the situation with the abuse that you've suffered. That's a way. I'm giving you a technique as a psychologist. That's how we get into what it is, the issue that rooting out the issue that you're struggling with. That can be really helpful for you in you sorting this through so that you can get it. So let's take mine, for example, since I offered it up. Since I don't like false realities, it just absolutely drives me nuts, makes me feel out of control. Then how can I take the situation where I'll never know the full truth? And you're right. At the end of the day, I'll never know the full truth. But you know what? I can give it my truth, and that's true. So there's how I root myself. I say, you know what? You don't need to know what actually happened to make peace with yourself. You know what you made happen. You know how you handled yourself. And even that if it is a lie, what you thought happened wasn't actually true, it doesn't change the fact that you handled the situation with as much integrity as you could muster in that situation. And it doesn't change what you can do today in order for you to move on. See how I'm kind of like processing this through with myself and giving myself what I need to get closure on it. So that's how you can approach it. So say, for example, let's take one of your scenarios. If somebody said that they feel like their self-worth was really damaged and they feel stupid for allowing themselves to be that vulnerable. Yeah, feels terrible. None of us like to step into a situation where we think we know what we've got and we find out that there are key pieces we didn't know. And if we knew, we would never have done that and never taken that risk. So I think in that situation, see what I'm saying? I'm saying, did you knowingly take the risks and then that bad things happen? You can say, well, there was a few things I kind of had some suspicions about, but did you know? No, you probably didn't really know. And if it was point blank, written out on paper, this person wants this, they're going to do this, and they're going to go do this with it afterwards, would you have said yes to that? Chances are probably not. Maybe if it would have been like modified, super soft. See how I'm so careful about all my right and wrong. But you get my point. My point is, and okay, so let's go to the opposite extreme. Say you did know. Say that this person told you they had a history. Okay, let's take my guy. All right, very vulnerable. He'd been married more than once, more than 3 times. I don't really want to say how many times, but more than that. He had a string of failed relationships. Now, don't you think as a psychologist I should have thought, that doesn't bode very well? It was enough of a problem. I knew I was going to have a hard time finding anybody who would marry us. Don't you think that's a pretty big red flag that I missed? Yeah. So how do I find peace around that? I can say, your heart's really big. You wanted to take a big chance. You do believe in people's capacity to change. That made you vulnerable to missing this could have been a real big red flag. You wanted what was back that you'd lost because your husband had died, and you wanted it back. We get that. That makes sense. Can you then forgive yourself for your vulnerability around this? Yes. Yes, I can. Now, that doesn't mean everybody in the world around me will forgive me for that, but I don't need their forgiveness going forward. All I have to do is live with myself. I don't live with them. It's not their life. It's not their problem. So I shut off listening to what everyone around me thinks about that decision. And then I ask myself these key questions. And then this is what I do next. I say to myself, what will you do going forward? Well, I'll listen better to some of those things and I'll ask more. Okay, what did I miss that maybe might have helped me? Well, I could have followed up with more of his friendships and saw how we got along with other people. That might have been helpful. But I can't perfect. Here's the hard part. Here's the hard part with all of us. We will never perfectly protect ourselves. It's impossible. We always live with a level of risk. We always will have to take a chance and roll a number. Life is like lottery. You will always have to step out. You will, if you never take a chance on anyone, you will never live, ever. You won't invest anything. You certainly wouldn't have had kids, and you would never get in a relationship with anybody. So in order for us to have a full life, we have to step out at some level. We won't perfectly, and there is nothing wrong with that. And anybody who tells you that it is, they're not being honest with themselves, and they certainly are not being kind to you, because that's a lie. I can't tell you as a creator how many times I hear people coming in hard on me about this. And I'm telling you, they're taking a risk in their life right now and something right now. And chances are it may go well and it may not go well, because that's what the way life is. But for them to come at me is really a projection of their own fear around their vulnerability. And so they're therefore then judging me harshly because they just don't like seeing it. So hold on to that and remember that when you start to feel you meet the critics. Yeah, it's hard. It is really hard. I'm reading your comments right now. We do get attacked for what we do, and we will never perfect. You and I are not God. We're not. We will never have the whole picture. And even God's taking a chance right now with us. So we talk about the biggest risk. He has the most on the line, and he's taking a chance with us. I mean, talk about an unbalanced situation that is, for those of you who believe. So yeah, I want you that it's important for us to live with ourselves with mercy, with grace, for us to realize that we did the best that we could. Yeah, maybe we missed some things. Yeah, I should have saw the number of times he'd been married and divorced and thought, that's not a very healthy number, But yet, here's the other thing. I know somebody who'd been married that many times, failed that many times, and he has an amazing marriage. He has an amazing marriage, and he's doing really wonderful things. And he was even in prison at one point. So is it fair to apply this to every single person? Absolutely not. There's always exceptions. But in general, it's important for us to listen to our gut, listen to what we know, draw as much information we can from as many sources as we could. I should have paid attention to the fact that he didn't want me to meet the other people in his life. I should have paid it. That's another red flag. It's called pocketing. Don't let anyone pocket you. If they're pocketing you, they're hiding something. They're either hiding you because they don't want people in their world to know they're with you, or they're hiding who they really are from you. So just pay attention. And here's another thing that I noticed. I felt uneasy enough that several months into the relationship, I hired a professional private investigator. That should have been enough. If our love was that good and it was that secure, it would never have needed to do a background check. By the way, I'm not weighing in and saying background checks aren't good, but how can someone be perfect and yet have questions? See, that's already, I was experiencing cognitive dissonance, very, very much so. Yeah, you know what? And I know another good one. Some of you guys are talking about the importance of family approval. In my case, my family loved him, and it wasn't a good indicator. So, but in other people's situation, your family struggle with somebody might be a good indicator, but it might be a sign that you have a challenging family that doesn't want to let go of you. So you have to kind of like weigh out all of this. It's always very complicated. Yeah, I'm reading through your back comments now. It is hard. So Will asked, if people looked at your personal life and put it on the line, and then they attack you and your family for the events that happen, that the public shame and humiliation, what do you do in response? What I do in response is that I have to remind myself is they're projecting. A lot of times people are filling things in with things that they don't know anything about. It happened to me this weekend on YouTube, actually. So, and the conversation's still there. I don't know if all of it's still there because the person may have removed some of it, but it was the short that I had put out about um, first date, people who hadn't even met me asking if I what I had for dinner and then asking if I cooked it. And I said I thought that was a new test question for, and maybe it's men and women, I don't know, but I'm only on the women meeting men's side, so that's all I can speak to. It's a new test question for some men to see whether or not I'm going to be a housewife for them or a house mother or something. And a guy wrote in and said, well, he got really actually cruel. I don't think the guy knew my age. He said, well, you're not hot, so you don't bring anything else. You're not sexy, so if you can't cook, what do you bring to the table? Well, first of all, that's highly insulting. So I challenged him back and said, well, I bring myself, and that's really a very narrow mindset to approach, consider somebody's value is their hotness. And he came back and just said, we're going to have to disagree. If you're not hot, then you need to at least do something for my life, or I don't want a relationship with them. And then he said, this is why men will not choose you. He's not filling in with an assumption. He said, because you're too strong of a woman. You're not feminine enough. So you just, now that you're over 40, you just need to stock it up that you're going to be single for the rest of your life. He made an error. He made an assumption because he didn't know my life. He didn't know I'd spent the majority of my adulthood in a relationship. I've lived, how many years have I been an adult? I've been an adult about 40 years. I've spent 33 years of my 40 years as an adult in a relationship with a man. He didn't know that. He made an assumption. So I said to him, yeah, I got widowed. And now I'm, trying to pick up my life after all of that happened. He goes, oh, sorry. But so that's what I'm saying. So when you have this kind of like judgment that happens, remember they're probably filling in out of their fears, their insecurities, or based on their assumptions. And it's very hurtful when they do that, but you have to find a way not to own it. I've learned, and it's hard because in the moment it's really hard when you get hit like with stuff like that. I've learned to ask myself, what is it they're projecting that may be out of their life, not really actually a reflection of mine? And it helps. It gives me some emotional distance that I need, so I don't take it so personally. Yeah. Yeah, men ask, do you do work? Emma said they ask, do you work? And I say, why? Are you looking for a job? That's great. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sorry that they recorded your personal conversations and arguments and then published them. Oh, shoot. You do have a right to privacy. Are you aware of that? That if anybody who's, you don't really technically can't quite do that like that. I mean, I'm just saying, I know because I wrote a book and I had to consult an attorney about what I can and cannot say. Yeah, and we all have a right to assume some things are kept private. Now, if you're at a public game and it happens to get filmed and you're with somebody else and national TV catches you, yeah, you've lost your right to privacy. It was a risk that you took, but yeah, it is painful. It's painful how we get exposed. It really is. I agree. Oh, so Muriel is saying, mine didn't come to marriage counseling, but he brought me roses and said I'm leaving. Oh, that's painful. I'm sorry. Yeah, it is. It's kind of intriguing. It's intriguing how they kind of end things. Yeah, privacy laws are both federal and state. They are. Yeah, there are attorneys who specialize in that you can actually. I mean, but it takes effort, money to do that, and then your fight becomes public. So there's another reason why a lot of people don't ever go here, because then it takes effort, money to do that, and then your fight becomes public. So there's another reason why a lot of people don't ever go here, because then you have to like trot out the details to back up what you're saying, and they're trotting out their details. And then now everything's public, so you've lost your privacy altogether when you do that. So just be aware that is a big downside to this, for sure. Exactly. So yeah, so making peace with what happened is a process. I think that's the final point that I really want to leave us on today, is that it's a process. It takes time. It's an incremental walkout, and it's like, it's the same as grief. It's like waves. It's like waves in the ocean. There will be periods where it's really intense and you'll be working through something actively, and then you'll have periods of quiet. be careful of two risks in that process. One is when we're being hit by a tsunami, that's what it feels like. You end up thinking it will never get better and I'm going to always feel like this forever. No, it's a tsunami. You're getting maybe smashed with the intensity of the feelings that you're having, but it doesn't last for forever. So hold on, it's going to subside and things will go back to normal again. Then the other error we make is when it goes quiet, we assume that we're done. We assume that it's over and we've kind of gotten on top of it and we've mastered it and we like, whew, okay, no, probably you haven't. Chances are something new will come up down the road and bring a new surge in a different direction. So be aware, be gentle with yourself. Realize this is a process. And what I have found, especially with my grief process after losing my husband, and this year would make it, he died in 2015. So this year's 8 years. So 8 years of loss, I've been grieving and working through this. I find that there's periods where the spacing from the onslaught of the emotions gets wider. It gets wider. In the beginning, they were like almost on top of each other, but over time, it gets longer and it's less intense. So hold on to yourself as you're processing your grief, your rage, your betrayal, your embarrassment, your shame, all of these feelings that we have after an abusive relationship. Be aware that it's like waves of the ocean. In the beginning, they're really, really close in the middle of a storm, but over time, it kind of becomes more separated further out. But don't assume just because you're being slammed by a wave that's always going to feel that way. And don't assume when you're in one of those lulls, it's quiet, that it's going to always be that way. It won't. It comes and it goes. So be flexible, be patient. And this is another reason, and you're making a good point. Thank you for saying that. I'm reading your comments again, guys. Thank you so much for pointing out the importance of community. Community is really important. That's what helps us when we get into those onslaughts of feeling smashed by what's happening. We can then reach out and find support with other people. I have an online community group that's a private online community group. In fact, I've now got it active to where you can subscribe, through YouTube. You can also just go directly to coffee.com and subscribe. The link, I will make sure the link is in the bio. And for $5 a month, you get Discord contact where you can chat in Discord. There's also a Facebook group where we kind of pass more along information. And then once a month, we hang out together. And the next one's going to be February 23rd at 6 o'clock Central Standard Time. We come on to a Zoom call. You don't have to show up. You don't have to have your face there. And we just sort of together hang out and process. It's very low key, not even as intense as this live. It's very low key. We kind of check in with each other. We're developing relationships. Some people have actually met in real life and have started building relationships, but it's just a way for us not to be alone. So that's another way for you to have a safe place, is find community that gets it. It's so important, guys. It's so important. It's so many of us. I know for me, one of the things that happened after that last relationship is I lost all my relationships. I realized everybody in my life is toxic to some level, and I didn't really know that. I mean, I kind of got used to it, so I didn't realize how accommodating I'd become and how it wasn't good. So I had to start over, and so it's helpful sometimes to step into a ready-made community where there's already safety, and then plus you get more contact with me, which I hope that's a good thing. I hope that's a good thing. Any last things that you guys want to talk about today before we wrap it up? And thank you again for those of you who thought that I was going to go live at 1 Central Standard Time with Tori. Whoops, sorry. Could you try again? Those of you who thought I was going to go live with Tori, what happened was we ended up with a lot of technical problems. Sound was an issue. I'm finding out that I can't do interviews across multiple platforms because of the audio piece. So I will schedule it again for YouTube only, talking to Tori of Annex Arrow Consulting. It was phenomenal. I have to say, guys, it was phenomenal. But right now she doesn't have a YouTube channel, but we'll bring her back when she's got one, and we'll do a joint live on YouTube. And she will talk to you about the 3 things you need to be careful of when you're in a high conflict divorce, and how to go in prepared, what your expectations and limitations should be around the whole thing. It was rich. I'll tell you, it was rich. I'm disappointed it didn't work out, but we will do this again and come back. Yes, Muriel asked a really great question about rumination. So that's a common problem after narcissistic abuse, is that we get caught in our head and we just sort of spin. You review things and you go over it. I'm not sure I understand. I wish my phone would stop doing it. You review things over and over in your head and you feel like you can't get out of that cycle. Very common. I will tell you how to do it, but I also want to point you to support. I have an on, it's a live group coaching with Trey De La Torre, he's finishing his PhD in occupational therapy. So you have me as a psychologist, and then he's almost an occupational therapist, and we teach skill building in 6 sessions over a course of 12 weeks. So we meet every other Saturday for 75 minutes live. It's live with you, only 15 people, and that's going to start up in March 4th. So if you're looking for an inexpensive way to get help, it's $20 a session. For $120 for the 6 weeks, you can come in and learn how to stop the rumination. But let me tell you quickly a little bit how to do that here without getting into the whole thing we're going to cover in these group coaching. So one of the problems, our mind is a meaning-making machine, and it assumes there's a logical explanation for everything that we're experiencing. So it takes these problems that are not solvable and acts as if it's solvable. And meanwhile, your fight and flight system is being activated, which is really awful feeling. And by the way, I struggle with anxiety, so I'm very familiar with this. This is what I've had to do, and it's very effective. So I suggest that what you do is you learn to recognize that thought as a non-productive thought. By the way, I'm going to give you a very wild idea. Have you ever considered that everything you think is not necessarily a good thing, and it may actually be bad thinking, maybe even toxic thinking? I mean, every physical state that you're in, you don't assume is natural physical state. You may say, oh, I sprained my leg, or I'm fighting a cold. Well, the same thing happens to our mind. There are things that we think that are not good things, that are sick thinking. So what I want you to do is learn to identify when you're into a sick style of thinking that you think is okay to think, but it's actually making you worse. And this is a test question. If by thinking about whatever it is, can I come up with a reasonable solution? So let's test it. If by thinking about what I want to have for dinner tonight, can I come up with a reasonable solution? Yeah, I can. I can come up with a plan. That's good thinking. Now, let me give you a question that will fail. If by thinking about why my ex did what he did to me, can I come up with a reasonable solution? No, I don't know why he did what he did. I'll never know why he did what he did. And thinking about that as if it's solvable will only make me sick. So it fails. It failed the test. So what do you do when something like that fails a test? You have to have what I call a toolkit of other things to think about. So begin to notice what you do in your life that requires your mind to use both attention and concentration. So what is that? Okay, math is a great example. When you are counting backwards by 7, you're not thinking about anything else. You're focusing on trying to figure out by 7 what the next number is. That takes both concentration and attention. There are other things that do that too. Maybe it's memorizing something. Maybe it's singing along to a song. Maybe it's talking to somebody who will not talk about that topic, but something else with you. Maybe it is, but I want you to notice what it is. I want you to create a list of things that fit that criteria. And if you have leakage, you start thinking about the problem again while you're doing this activity, it fails, you need a better tool. But come up with like 4, 5, 6 things that you can do in bed, you can do in the car, you can do, when you're wherever. So let's go back. So you have a thought that's ruminating, running through your head that you can't stop on. You ask yourself that question. If by thinking about this, can I come up with a reasonable solution? It fails. Now that's what's called catastrophic thinking. That's the word for it, catastrophic thinking. So it fails. So what you do is you say stop, and you replace it with that tool that you've created in that toolkit with that activity. So say that I get into this thought of like, well, how much of what really happened is real? I like, Kerry, stop. And then I say, all right, 1,993, 984, 906. You see, I put myself to work and move away from the thought. Now, in the beginning, you may have to do this 1,000 times a day. That's typical. When people have a chronic style of ruminating, they're thinking that thought a lot. It's very common for them. So no judgment. You cannot judge yourself on the number of times you catch yourself. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really actually matter. But every time you catch yourself ruminating like that, stop and replace it with an activity that forces you to requires attention and concentration. And you'll find as you do that, you'll stop doing it. You'll get out of the habit. It's like what happens with our brain is something that you do the first time, it creates this new pathway. You'll think that there's all these cells in the brain and they're webbed. They're like the old-fashioned telephone lines that used to run through our air. Now they don't, but they used to. So we'd have all these crisscrossing of lines. So your new behavior creates a new line. And you do it over and over and over. The brain creates shortcuts to it, gets really used to it, and creates a path. You're trying to break that down, trying to stop it. The way to stop it is to stop the behavior. And as you stop using that path, the mind is very efficient. We'll say, oh, that's no longer used. We don't need it. And then we'll get rid of it. But it takes time, it takes practice. You got to build new paths in with new habits. So that's how to do it. That's one of the things that we cover in that group coaching with Trey De La Torre. It starts March 4th on a Saturday. And then we go for 6 sessions over a course of 12 weeks in live, where we come back and review it. If you're interested, I'll make sure the link is in. It's not there now, but I'll make sure I put a link in there so that you can know about it and join it. All right, guys, this has been wonderful. I'm so glad to hang out with you today. And was there any other questions that came in that I didn't address? Yeah, I hope you do join the online community. It's called Toxic Free Relationship Club. We have also a toxic free Discord zone. So I would love to see you there. It's both men and women. We have both men and women in these groups, and it's very supportive, super supportive. All right, you guys, have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It was awesome, and I'll be back. Bye-bye.